Hello, everyone. We're here for another episode of Incessantly Seeking, and I'm so thrilled to invite back our guest, Sarah Baldwin. She's a somatic experience practitioner, and recently I had a little bit of an experience with somatic work, and I'm just so curious to hear more about it. So, thanks for coming back.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really good to be here today.
Yes, thank you. So for me, it was so healing to do somatic work. And in my experience, when I went to the Hoffman Institute, is that they kind of program a whole week of activities that help you kind of release emotion and understand where that's coming from, awareness, all of that. How does somatic work usually works out in the field?
Hmm. Well, what most people, somatic work is generally new to a lot of people. When people think of, therapy in general, they think of talk therapy.
Hmm.
And that means where I'm gaining, and there's benefit to that. I'm gaining an understanding of what happened and why it happened and how it wasn't my fault. And oh, that's making sense. And what was unconscious is becoming more conscious in my awareness. All of that's helpful. But just for those who are like, what the heck is somatics? So all of that's helpful. But for anybody listening who's done any of that, or maybe you've done some coaching or mindset work, you probably noticed is all of that understanding doesn't actually it doesn't change a lot of the things I'm struggling with. Like, for example, I might understand why there's nothing to be anxious about anymore and the past is over and I can be relaxed, but I can't actually be relaxed. There's no amount of
Right.
me rationalizing around that helps. Or I want to go start dating again and I feel blocked around that. Like I'm avoiding it altogether, or I feel panicked about it. You can't talk your way out of those things. And so many other things like shame or how we attach in our relationships, our attachment, and lots of other stuff. And the reason being is because the experience of trauma is subcortical. All that means is it lives in our bodies, not up in our thinking brain, and is experienced in our bodies. And so in our autonomic nervous system. And so the resolution of trauma must be addressed somatically or subcortically, which means somatics just means you think of it like of the body, so embodied. And so when we experience traumas in the past that haven't been resolved, essentially what occurs is our nervous system thinks
Hmm.
that thing is still happening now, or it could happen again at any given moment. So the past isn't actually the past. The past is the ever living present, meaning our system thinks that what happened 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, or 40 years ago when you were a newborn is still happening right now. And so we have to start speaking the language of our nervous system, which is somatics, because our nervous system is the system responsible for, well, it's our self protective system, but it's also the system when it's protecting us. The symptom of that is our suffering or dysregulation. So when it comes to somatic work, the foundation of it is beginning to what's called reshape our vagal tone. And simply in what that in layman's terms, that just means reshaping our nervous system. So when we've experienced things in the past, like that our system doesn't know is over, our nervous system is shaped in a particular way. And that might just mean for listeners like, yeah, I feel anxious a lot of the time. That's what I feel a lot. That means your nervous system is shaped in a state called your sympathetic nervous system, where it hangs out there. Some people are like, oh, I never have any energy. I feel out of it. I feel like blah, blah, apathetic, hopeless. Well, that means your nervous system is shaped in something called your dorsal vagal complex. So it's just a different shaping of your nervous system. And some people have like panic inside, but they feel trapped in it, which is our state of freeze. So the first component of any trauma work and any somatic work should be regulation of our nervous system. So that should be the primary thing that we're starting with. And that means beginning to get in the driver's seat of this system that we inhabit. And first, we have to understand it. And then we have to begin speaking to it in a way that it understands. So there's particular things that we can do, like movements, sounds, like vibrations, touch points in our body, using our tongue, our soft palate, our eyes, using what else have I not named? Breathing, different breathing exercises, lots of other things that speak to our nervous system that essentially say, hey, nervous system, the past is over. I know you don't think it is, but it is. I promise. Through regulation. And when we regulate, it talks to our nervous system in a way that it understands. And then our nervous system says, oh, maybe we are safe. And so we have a moment where we feel a little bit better. And if we can compile enough of those experiences of regulation, what begins to happen is we start to reshape our nervous system. And what does that mean? It means you go from feeling anxious a lot to, yeah, I don't really feel anxious as commonly anymore. I feel more in my body. I feel more relaxed or at peace. And that's because your nervous system is learning that the past is no longer here. It's actually in the past. So that I would say is the foundation of all somatic work. And then a secondary component that is very, very important is beginning to what's called build our capacity for activation. So what's really unhelpful with a lot of like people who are claim to be doing trauma work that are really doing re-traumatizing work is if I have not done the work to begin regulating my nervous system and start to build my capacity to be with activation, which means charge in my body, which is, think of it like traumatic energy. If I haven't done the work to do that, and somebody says, okay, we're going to go back and we're going to relive that experience, or we're going to write about that experience or talk about that experience or anything. If I don't have the capacity to hold that experience in my nervous system, then I'm just reliving it. And there is zero benefit in reliving it. Actually, it could be detrimental because I'm imprinting it even more of I'm going back to it. I'm re-experiencing it without making it different. That's not helpful. And a lot of times we end feeling dysregulated and out of it or overwhelmed. And that's actually not helpful. What we want to do is start working the muscle of I can begin metabolizing or being present to small amounts of activation. So when we think about like someone's trauma history, I want you to think about it like we have a giant jug maybe, and inside of that jug are all the traumatic experiences I've had. Now, what's very important for everyone listening to know is trauma is not actually it's not the event. It's how the event or events overwhelms my body's capacity to process the event. So it's really an experience of energetic overwhelm. So imagine all of that energy, that charge is in this receptacle or this jug. So what we want to do with trauma work is imagine that the jug has a little spigot on the end. What we're looking for is that we open up the spigot just a little bit and I hold a small amount of that activation, meaning in my body, I can start to feel it and be present to it, a small enough amount that it's not like it's engulfing me or overwhelming me. So simply, what could this look like? Very simply, if I was working with someone, we'd first want to anchor in regulation. So that's one of the keys of somatic therapeutic work is we'd want to notice something in our space or remember a time where we felt really regulated, present, here, and good. And then it could be simple as tell me about something that didn't go right today. Something as simple as that. And then somebody says, oh, well, I got this email where somebody said, oh, hey, we need to do this review on this thing, or we need to talk about this thing, or whatever, conflict. And I would pause them right there and I say, notice what's happening in your body as you said that. See if you can locate it. And somebody might say, who's not used to being in their body, they might say, I don't know what you mean. And so our work as a somatic practitioner is to help guide us back into the sensations of what I'm feeling. So it might be, okay, I notice that my chest feels a little tight, and we might even notice an image. Oh, it feels like someone's squeezing my throat. And I would say, great, let's be with that. So we don't want to brush that by. We actually want to see, can I actually be in the activation that's occurring? So not push it away.
Mm-hmm.
And as I am with the activation, the beautiful thing about our human organism is it actually knows how to discharge that energy. And that means that it takes the energy that's inside, which is probably rooted in traumatic energy, and then it takes that energy and it gets it out of our body. And so what we would notice is my job is to help shepherd someone's nervous system, because sometimes our nervous systems can get really sucked into the activation. Like if I said, notice that activation, they might say, oh my gosh, now I feel like I'm going to throw up. Now I feel, so it's pulling our system in. So my job would be to, and anyone's job who's doing this work would be to say, let's notice that nice thing again for a moment. This is called the process of pendulation. So I go back to notice the nice thing, and then I go back to the activation. Can I be with it a little longer? And the more we can be with it, what starts to happen is the activation actually starts to process out. So you'll notice, oh, there might be some, it might get a little more intense first. There might be some constriction, shaking, intensity building, heat. And then if we stick with it and allow it, not trying to manipulate it, that energy will then start to discharge, meaning I might notice, oh, there's a softening now in my shoulders. Oh, I just took a deeper breath. Oh, all of a sudden it was just called the letting down phase. So now my system has taken that energy, it's processed it through and metabolized it, and it's discharged it. That is the principle of really trauma healing. That's what it is. And if we do that consistently and enough, what transpires is we're taking all of this stored trauma and we're successfully allowing it to leave our body. I know
I
that's quite
see.
complex, but that's really, if I could put it in a nutshell, what we're doing when we're doing trauma work.
If this was a month ago, I would agree with you that it sounds so complex and I don't understand it. But after having a little bit of that experience, you start to realize how powerful it is. And for me, it really, I think he manifested in low energy. Like I felt so weighted down that once I was able to express some of that stuff, I could see the energy flux into my creativity and all this other stuff.
That's right. That's right. So when we are, there's different places that we can be in our nervous system, and one of them is called our dorsal vagal complex. And this is our state of shutdown. It's our most extreme form of self-protection in our nervous system. And we only go there when our nervous system has decided, when we've been in situations in the past, they were so dangerous, we couldn't fight it and we couldn't flee it. So our system says what we can do is shut down. And in the shutting down, we lose connection to our body. We lose connection to our feelings, our truth, our needs. And in many ways, we're like a bear in hibernation. Now, what we want to do is begin to wake that bear up, showing our nervous system it's safe to come out of this place. And when you do, we come into this energy that had to be dormant because it wasn't safe to be mobilizing. And when we do that, it brings us closer to regulation. Our what's called life force energy is what Peter Levine calls it, and into our vitality.
It's so funny. I'm smiling because that's exactly my childhood. You couldn't escape it and you couldn't change it as being a child and dependent on your parents. So just shutting down was the thing that I did. And
Exactly.
once I started to realize how I'm doing that in my adult life and how that does not work for adult relationships to succeed, it really explains a lot of the chaos of my dating experience till now. Even recently I was chatting with someone and something was said that I didn't like and I just shut off. I just didn't respond. I didn't want to talk anymore. And I realized, oh, this is the work. Like, okay, how can I do this differently now that I know that this is what I do? Instead of not responding ever, I took a moment and then responded more kindly. Something else again happened today, work related, that I wanted to shut down and be like, walk out, drop the mic, do all those things. And I
Yeah,
was like, okay, well, take a breath and, ask the question instead of assuming, even though you know the truth, just see how the other person responds. So just being able to take these little steps has been huge.
that's right. And the way that we go towards that is so important for folks to understand. If we don't have control over our nervous system, and it's our self-protective nervous, it's our autonomic nervous system, it's our self-protective system. It is looking out into the world every millisecond of our whole lives to see if we are safe or not. And the way it decides is our past experience. So when you describe that thing at work today,
Mhm.
of course, what happened was that just tells me, oh, your threat detector, because we all have one in our brainstem, was looking out into your current life and it said, ooh, what's currently happening reminds me of the past. What did we do in the past that kept us safe? Shut down and disconnect and go to your island. Your nervous system reflexively said that's what we should do. And so if we aren't in control of our nervous system and we don't have this awareness, then it's going to
Mhm.
actually just reflexively do that. And we don't actually have control over it. The behaviors arise from that place. And it's not doing that to make our lives suck or hard. It's doing that because it doesn't know that our lives today are different than our lives in the past. And so when we can practice, when we're not just in experiences that are triggering for us, but we practice getting to know our nervous system. We practice this process of regulating, being in our bodies, processing energy through. Then, when we're in situations that are dysregulating for us, we're able to notice. Doesn't mean you're going to catch it right away. Might be a half
Mhm.
an hour later where you're like, oh, that's happening. I need to bring regulation to my nervous system right now. And then we do some things to regulate. So I just want to explain that to listeners, because the process that I was in for so long before I was doing this work professionally or in my healing journey was, I feel like I was cruising along okay. Then things would happen in life and I would be like, I would feel really out of control. And then after, like the next day, I would be like, why did I do that? Why did I just fawn and agree with that person? And I don't even agree with them. I just was like, oh, okay, whatever you want. I don't actually feel that way. Or I shut down and did this thing. Or I was like, don't ever leave. I'm, whatever. And I was like, why was I doing that? Well, I wasn't doing it. My nervous system was doing it. And when we can gain control of it through somatic healing, it really begins to change our external life.
And listening to you, I have so many questions, but one of them is like, we come from a generation of parents that believed that the babies needed to self-soothe and let them cry for as many hours as it takes. And now we're talking about all these dysregulated adults who can't get their own emotions in check. So clearly letting your babies cry until they stop crying does not work, mom and dad. But, how would that do, I guess, manifest in the proper way as a child?
Say that one more time. How would it what?
Yeah, how as young parents, like new parents, what is the right thing to do to help our babies become more regulated adults? I guess that's the question.
Great question. Well, first of all, the very best gift we can give our children is our own regulated nervous system. And what I mean by a regulated nervous system for everyone who's listening is our nervous system can be experienced two ways: in regulation or dysregulation. Regulation, we're going to qualify, that's everything what we think of as good: feeling present, here, safe, capable, able, open, expanded, vulnerable, all the yummy feelings we want. Dysregulation is what we're going to qualify everything as what we call not good: anxiety, feeling I can never slow down, shutting off, burnt out, not really here, depressed, dissociated, all of those things, snapping at people. All of that's dysregulation. Dysregulation, your nervous system is actively protecting you. Regulation, your nervous system is not actively protecting you. So
Mm.
when we have trauma history, our nervous system is going to be actively protecting us a lot. And that means we're going to be dysregulated a lot. And a regulated nervous system does not mean that you're in these yummy, awesome feelings all the time. It means you spend the predominant amount of your time there. But when you become dysregulated, because we all do, you know how to regulate. So when I'm
Mm.
feeling like I want to snap, I know what to do to bring myself back into regulation. So just want to name that for folks. Now, what's very important to know is that all human babies do not have the ability to self regulate when they're born. This is very problematic for a baby because they're born into the world. And that means that when they're in distress, when they're dysregulated, they physiologically cannot calm themselves down. They do not have the ability to do that. That means that they are completely at the mercy of the adults around them to regulate their nervous system. So when I say it is the best gift that you can give your children is to regulate your nervous system, it is the best gift you can give your children is to regulate your nervous system. Because if a child does not have or I guess I'll say this: when a child is born, if they're born into with caregivers, let's say even loving caregivers who are dysregulated, the child is in trouble. Because I might have a loving mother who's highly anxious and terrified all the time. She loves me, but she cannot regulate me because she's not regulated. So even a mother that's picks up the baby and is like, honey, calm down. You're okay. You're okay. You're okay. You're okay. Oh, wait, call the doctor. Something wrong with you? Something wrong with you? That I know they might be present with the child and they might be like glued into the child, but they cannot help that child calm down. And that means that the child has a few options. And because what is not an option is to stay chronically dysregulated. They
Hmm.
would not be able to continue to thrive physically and emotionally. So their body knows that, and their system says, all right, well, I got to do something here to get regulated. And so at a very young age, if I had a mother, or it could be a father, mother, parent, whatever,
Or
but let's say,
both.
or both. So, or two mothers or two fathers or whatever you got. But let's say we've got, I got a mother who's highly anxious. And so that means sometimes she's regulated, but a lot of times she isn't. So my nervous system as a child learns I am not safe, but sometimes she can be regulated. So she's on again, off again. She can sometimes do it and not do it. And she's also sending me the message that I'm not okay alone because she doesn't feel okay alone. So we need to be glued to each other to be safe. So my nervous system says, okay, the adapt thing I need to do it to adapt is be overly focused on you, because if mom is happy, then I'll feel safe because I can be regulated. So these people become overly focused on their partner, their partner's needs. They're like, they could be out somewhere and they have like a sixth sense for how is everyone else feeling. Everybody needs to be else okay and not mad at me, because if that's all okay, then I'm okay. Because if they're regulated, I'm regulated. It's called an anxious attachment. So that's the result of my caregivers not being able to regulate. Now, if I had a caregiver who was never able to regulate with me, or not very often, or they were abusive, neglectful, my nervous system says, oh, this is very bad. There's nobody here. And or if they are here, they're not safe. And I can't self-regulate. So what our nervous system learns to do is it says, I'm not even going to reach out because it's not safe to her. I won't be met. Instead, I'm going to shut down. And I'm going to begin disconnecting from needs, disconnecting from the need for connection, for even knowing what my needs are, for needing support of anyone else. And I begin to shut down and go to an island. It's a brilliant survival response. And so what does that look like in your adult life? Somebody says, how can I help? You say, oh, I'm fine. You wouldn't even know how to ask for help because you don't know how to ask for help because nobody ever helped you. And so my inclination is not going to be to reach out. My inclination was to shut down. We learn all this before we can even run. We can learn this before we're even walking. So just to name like how brilliant this is. And when you said the crying it out thing, which happened to me, again, definitely everyone of our generation, crying it out, there's no such thing. What is actually occurring there when you let a baby be in distress, because their nervous system thinks, whoa, this is really bad. I might be dying. I'm all alone and I can't calm myself. The only reason a baby stops crying when you do that is because they have actually gone into the most extreme form of self-protection or dysregulation called the dorsal vagal complex. They're not regulated and they are most certainly not calm. They're so highly dysregulated that they have now just gone, oh, you think of it like almost like becoming comatose. I have literally shut down. I have no connection to feeling, no connection to self, no connection to anything. And that was like seen as like, oh, look, they fell asleep. That's so great. No, they're so extremely dysregulated that they're literally like leaving their bodies. They're not present at all, which is why a baby who is neglected, for example, you'll notice that they have a very flat affect, meaning they're not full of expression. And people are like, oh, the child's so easygoing. No, they're not. And by the way, no child should just be what parents can call easygoing. And I mean, of course, there are children who are very regulated, but a child who has no needs, doesn't exist. That's a child who's shut down. And because they had to learn how to be shut down. So the very best thing that a parent can do for their children is to do somatic work and regulate your nervous system. Because when you are regulated, you regulate your child's nervous system. And when you do that at a young age, you are literally shaping their vagal tone. That means that when you do that successfully enough for a child, they grow up to be a child who lives the predominant amount of their life regulated. And when they become dysregulated, their nervous system can quickly regulate. No problem. I mean, I did not have that. It was unfortunately, but if we give this to our children, that's what then they live a whole life of. So it's incredibly, incredibly important. And it's a lot of somatic work is so innate, meaning if you see a crying baby, if I'm regulated, when a baby's crying, I notice my nervous system, I feel a little ooh in my chest, maybe like a little activation. That's good. That means you're attuned with the child. That's what tells you I have to go do something. So, this is why, by the way, if you had a depressed parent, they didn't get that pull and they probably just left you because they couldn't connect with you in that, they couldn't attune. So, anyway, I feel this pull. That makes me get up and pick up the child, but I'm not going into dysregulation with them like some parents do. Like, oh my God, are you okay? Are you choking? Are you choking? That's not regulated. So if I pick the baby up and I put them on my chest and I start to sway and I tap on their back, maybe I hum, I sing to them. What I'm doing is regulating their nervous system. And in a few minutes, guess what happens? The baby calms down. So, if you want to look at, well, maybe someone listening doesn't, but if I want to look at, because I do this for a living, um, a child and what's going on with them, all I have to do is look at the parent. What's happening
Mm.
in your parent's nervous system? That is going to tell me what's happening in the child's nervous system. And a lot of people think my child is misbehaving, my child is acting out, my child is anxious all the time. No, where do you think that stemmed from? From what's happening in the parent's nervous system. And the beautiful thing I say to parents a lot is it's never too late. Your kid could be 16 years old. It's not too late. You can do this for them and with them now.
As you're saying this, three things occur to me. Number one, I never realized that the process of soothing a baby is very somatic. You're humming, you're
Yeah,
swaying, you're placing them on your body. I mean, I haven't had a child yet, but they say the first thing that the doctor does is to put the baby on your bare chest so you can hear the heartbeat and you're still in sync. I mean, all of this is so body, experience and knowledge and not at all like a mental process.
that's right.
And the second thing that made me think of while you were speaking is number one is like what the service that we do to baby boys, right? I think baby boys, we want them to be strong and tough, and the whole boys don't cry. So we not only let them cry longer, but shut them down emotionally through most of their, young life. And now we're seeing this surface of what people now are calling the narcissists, which are primarily, male identified as of the stories that are coming out now and this new terminology. But it always makes me wonder, it's like, yeah, of course these men are turning into like dad inside because we keep shutting them down on their children. And in that process, one of my questions for you is like, how can we deal with that disconnect? Because I don't know much about narcissistic personality disorder besides what we see and we hear out there, but it feels very clear that it is a disconnect. The fact that
Hmm.
someone can mistreat someone or take pleasure in seeing someone hurt because of their behavior, there's some kind of emotional disconnect. Have you had any experiences working with that in somatic work?
Oh, for sure. So what I would say is I wouldn't say that there's plenty of women that also
Yeah.
have narcissism. Narcissism is simply a trauma response. So
Mm.
this is a response to trauma. People respond differently to traumatic experience. A lot of people internalize the trauma. I'm bad, I'm worthless, I'm small, that's internalization. Some people externalize. And narcissism in general is an externalization of that trauma. So I'm going to control others. I'm going to make others feel small. I'm going to manipulate others as a way to feel a sense of control inside of me. So it's the
Mm.
externalization. So it is certainly a response to traumatic experience. I will say, there's definitely a lot of um, the word narcissism is thrown around a lot. What I would say is there's lots of people with narcissistic traits. So remember, with all diagnoses, there was a time where in a DSM where someone said, okay, they came up with a cluster of symptoms. So they said, all of these symptoms, it seems like a lot of people have these symptoms. What are we going to call this thing, this phenomenon that's happening where everybody has these kinds of symptoms? And let's call it borderline personality disorder. Let's call this narcissism. So it's important to name that it's a clustering of symptoms. So there's lots of people who might have a fair amount of that clustering of symptoms. So but what I'm trying to get at is there's a broad spectrum of what this can look like in folks. It's not just all one thing, like a monolith. There's like, oh, this person really has a lot of narcissistic tendencies. They cannot empathize. They don't have an ability to do that. They don't have an ability to everyone in their life is an extension of them. These are just some narcissistic things. They are stunted at a developmental age where it is completely self-focused and self-oriented. And then we have narcissists who are doing really more obvious, what would look like more obviously abusive things. So there's different levels, just wanted to name that, of narcissism, but it's most certainly a trauma response. And what's the common combination of folks in a dynamic is someone who is, both are codependent, but someone who had to be invisible. That was the way that they survived. They had to have no needs. They had to take up no space. They had to tread lightly and make sure everyone else was okay. That is a person who's going to couple with a narcissist. Why? Because the narcissist takes up all the space, has all the needs, controls, and lots of other things. And this other person, although they don't love it, it's familiar. So I know how to be in that dynamic, if that makes sense. And part of our healing is like, oh, I don't like this dynamic anymore. Oh, wait, I do have needs. Oh, I might not feel safe to communicate them yet, but now it is a huge, for anyone listening, if you get to a place where you're like, I feel frustrated about this, and I used to not, like, that is a sign of healing, that you feel frustrated with something that's not okay. So there's, and then we begin to make contact with our needs. And then we start we might still be gaslit, like out of our own reality, which is what narcissists can tend to do. But the more that we embody our self and embody our truth, the more we become unwavering in it. And then that dynamic will no longer work for us, because a narcissist cannot be with somebody who is unmovable. Meaning, if you are unmovable like a tree and you're like, no, this is my truth and I know my truth and you can never take it away. That's not someone who a narcissist is going to be with, because they can't control that person.
While discussing this narcissistic tendencies, right, that we were talking about, there is so much out there about it. And I love what you said, that it's a trauma response, and that gives us a lot of empathy towards those people. Hearing you talk about the description of that kind of person, it was exactly like the last person I dated. And it was exactly that. Like, I grew up knowing I couldn't take a lot of space. I was the youngest. There was a lot of trauma. There's a lot of drama. And so you end up being lured by someone who is larger than life. Very usually charismatic, big personality. And I love what you said about trusting in yourself and knowing your unwavering truth, because you're absolutely right. Once you know your truth, then they can't take that away from you and they have to move on to the next person. However, like me, I was like the codependent person who was like, well, what do you mean I hurt your feelings? And I love when we were talking about the babies and they cried themselves to sleep. I'm like, it was me. I would throw myself on the floor and cry and be like, why this is happening? I love you. And now I look back, I'm like, oh my God, I was behaving like a toddler. But I didn't have that self-regulation. So if you can catch up a little bit on what we're talking about, the narcissistic tendencies as a trauma response, would be great.
Yeah. So our systems are drawn to what they know.
Mm-hmm.
And so whatever our baseline for love was as a child is what our system is going to be drawn to at first. So that doesn't mean that you received love. It may have been that you were neglected or your needs were not met, or you were harmed or gaslit or whatever. And so that's what my system says love is. And so then when I go out to my adult life, that's what I'm going to be first drawn to. And so if our system has to choose between survival or thriving, it's always going to choose survival. And that means that if our young parts are running the show in our lives and we can't self-regulate, for example, then we will for sure choose the narcissistic relationship because it gives us a semblance of safety over being all alone. For example, an 8-year-old would not choose to be by themselves in the world. They're going to be choose to be in that home no matter how bad the home was. And so
Mm.
that's what happens in our relationships, which is why you see a lot of times, particularly happens a lot with women, people saying to a woman, maybe, no, this isn't specific to women, of course, this could happen to um, folks of any gender identity, but having the experience of people saying, "Oh, you deserve so much better than that. You should leave. Why don't you leave?" Well, because I'm, for all intents and purposes, 8 years old, and where do you want me to go as an 8-year-old? I'm going to die by myself. And so we might cognitively feel like, yeah, I know I should go, I know I should go, but you can't go because your younger parts are running the show. And so the more that we can self regulate, we can become the parent to ourselves, then no longer we need this abusive person to substitute what only we can be.
I'm laughing because there was a breakup I went through, and it was during the holidays, it was Christmas, and it was during COVID. So everything was shut down. So I couldn't be with my family. I couldn't leave the country. And I went to a friend's house and I cried on her couch. And I remember saying to her, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to get through this breakup. And it's exactly what you're saying. Like, now that I look back, I'm like, that was not an adult woman. That was a child going through that experience of abandonment.
That's right. That's right. And the beautiful thing about healing is the more we regulate our nervous system, the more that we address the past, the more that we heal our trauma, we really come home to ourselves and we create a new childhood experience in a lot of ways where we are no longer looking for something out in the world to save us. We are the one that saves us. And when that occurs, I I am complete. And that means that yes, I need relationships, I want a partner, I want community. We all need connection. But I'm connecting out of choice, not survival. It's a very big difference. And when you pick partners from choice versus survival, you are picking somebody who's actually right for you versus somebody who can give you a semblance of safety in the out of control.
So, how do we get out of the survival mode of our child years and into a thriving life with a somatic experience practictioning work?
Mm. So it's really, what I shared at the beginning is the first two components are paramount in that understanding your nervous system, beginning to regulate your nervous system, beginning to process through what's called titration, small amounts of traumatic energy, and then coming to the aid of these young parts. So the more that so like I said before, a dysregulated parent does not regulate a child. They
Hmm.
could be really loving, but they don't regulate them. This is also why when people try to do parts work and they are dysregulated, it does not regulate them. So let's say I'm dysregulated and I tell myself, it's okay, just calm down. I'm doing things to regulate. But I have a young part of me present. And what that's not going to regulate adult me. What's going to regulate, or rather my younger parts, what's going to regulate my younger parts is a regulated adult. And so part of our work is becoming what I call a competent protector. And that means a capable and able adult self. So the more we can work the muscle of that through regulating us feeling, and for listeners, just think of a moment where you felt like you could take care of another, but not from a codependent way, where you felt grounded, capable, able. It could have been a moment in nature where you felt connected, in awe, present, alive, at peace. That part of you is who we need to comfort the younger parts. When we
Mm.
do that enough, when we can get that person, that part of us alive in our bodies, when we can do that, we can then come to the aid of our younger parts. And that means soothe them in a way they were never soothed. I call this internal co-regulation. So self-regulation, we do it on our own. Co-regulation, we're doing that now together, you and I, as well as listeners. Internal co-regulation is, can I get my adult capable self present when a young part of me is in my body, like when you were talking about throwing yourself on the ground? Can I get adult me there to comfort this part of me? If you consistently do that enough, the younger parts actually get new imprinted experiences and it changes The way you show up in the world, and the young parts no longer show up. Our adult self shows up.
So it's almost like we're changing our emotional memory.
Yeah. Yep.
Instead of being like a muscle memory, is like an emotional memory.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Because I feel like a lot of rumination happens for a lot of adults, especially in this year of, in this time of anxiety. A
Yeah.
lot of, oh, what if, and, why not? And if I've done this, or if I said things differently. And from hearing you, it sounds like we're just re traumatizing ourselves by reliving that experience over and over again.
I wouldn't necessarily qualify it as re-traumatizing, but when we listen to our thoughts, it increases our activation. So
Mm,
if what polyvagal theory shows us is our autonomic state creates our story. So whatever's happening in our nervous system is directly affecting our thoughts, which is why when you're regulated and you feel good, your thoughts are not going to be about how everything's falling apart and you're behind in life and they're going to leave you. You don't think that way because your thoughts are a result of what's happening in your nervous system. But if you're dysregulated, your thoughts are going to be all from survival. And if you
right.
listen to those thoughts, they increase. So the more you listen to them, the more they grow like a fire. And so part of our work is to really orient ourselves away from listening to those thoughts because if we do, it increases the dysregulation.
And how do you shut those voices down? Like, how do you
Yeah, well,
listen to
we try.
yourself, but don't listen to yourself?
So we want to notice. And when I notice the thoughts, my job is to say, oh, where am I in my nervous system right now? Am I regulated or not? So if I'm having thoughts about how they're going to leave me, I can't trust them, well, that's a clue I'm not regulated. So you can't actually stop the thoughts. But what you can do is turn your attention towards regulating. So instead of sitting ruminating, I want you to think about doing something that's going to bring regulation to your nervous system. If you do that, and the thoughts will still be there, and then once you're regulated, the thoughts will dissipate and go away. So
What's something
that's
we
the
can do, like, to regulate? I mean, because some people run. I know a lot of things that, like, friends that break up and then lose like a lot of weight because they just won't stop exercising. And then there's people the opposite, right? They go through something that's like really traumatic and sad, or a breakup, and they start drinking a lot, or they start eating a lot.
well, all those things you just described are not regulating. Those things are
Okay.
called coping strategies. So those are things that numb the experience. They don't actually discharge the energy that we're wanting to discharge. They numb us.
Mm.
Um, sometimes if we can't find anything else, then numbing is the best thing we have. But what we want to do is instead of numbing, we want to turn towards regulating. And regulating is anything, again, that supports me to feel more present here. Uh, we've talked about this already, but something as simple as humming. The sound om. If you say the sound om, that vibrational tone regulates the nervous system. A sound from somatic experiencing that's used a lot, VOO. So it sounds like this. Boo. So any deep vibrational sounds, really helpful. Using all the senses you have access to bring you into present space. So going outside and feel the ground below you and really feel it and hear sounds, really hear details in them. Smell something, really smell details in them. Bilateral movement. So when we connect left and right hemispheres of our brain, literally tapping left and right on our body brings regulation. Tapping points on meridian lines brings regulation. Breathing cycles. If you're in a heightened state of dysregulation, we want to just do shorter inhalations and long, slow exhalations like you're blowing out a candle. Simple breathing structure is breathe in for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 7, exhale through your mouth like you're blowing out a candle for 8 seconds. So, all things like that are going to bring us into regulation. Being in nature, it's free and it's a powerful way to regulate. Um, Going on a walk, but not with your phone and not in your thoughts. I call these wonder walks where imagining you just got to planet Earth and you've never seen anything before and taken the world around you with eyes of I've never seen it or senses like I've never seen it. All of the things I've just mentioned bring you back to presence. And so we're
Mm.
looking at not like you feel like $1,000,000 or like I feel so good, but do I feel a little bit better? If you do, you successfully just brought your nervous system closer to regulation. If you do that, when I'm working with people, we map the nervous system and then we start the reshaping process. And this means, like, 10 to 15 times a day, you're going to take 3 to 5 minutes, really 3 minutes probably, and do something to regulate. And you pepper it in throughout your day. And if we do this enough, we start to actually reshape our nervous system. Meaning, people go from, I work with people who are like, I need a Xanax to leave my house, to no longer needing it at all. People that go from shut down and hopeless to like, I don't live that way anymore. And that's not, I was going to say it's not a miracle. It is a miracle, but it's possible. It's what happens when we actually embody the work that talks to our nervous system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and ever since you said it, I now I have my arms crossed and I'm tapping because I'm like, oh, that's a simple one. I'm doing it without thinking about it. But one thing is resistance, right? I know that I need to breathe and I'm so fucking angry because whatever, something is happening. I'm in an argument, I'm in that moment, or somebody said something and I don't have the time to step away. Like how do I handle it? So there's that, and then there's also the internal resistance of like, I know these are the things I need to be doing, but then all the reasoning why not, right? I don't have time, I'm too busy, or it's not going to work anyways, or why bother, and all those things.
Yep. So, number one, a special ops team does not get their mission in a book and then expect themselves to jump out of a helicopter in the middle of the night and swim 17 miles. What do? They practice in safety again, 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 so that when they're in this place of unsafety, they reflexively know what to do. This work is the same. So we won't be able to, if we just look for this stuff when we're having problems, it won't work. What we have to do is practice again and again and again and again. And when we do that, when we're in these challenging situations, it becomes relatively easy to use the resources to regulate ourselves. And that's maybe one of the most important things to let people know, the importance of that. And what we're looking for is not, again, like I feel like $1,000,000. It's, do I notice anything that's different? If you went from, let's say, a breathing cycle I just did, from a restricted chest to I took a deeper breath, that is so huge. You literally just talked to your nervous system and it responded to you by saying, oh, okay, we're safer than I thought. If we can start to see those as big steps, not small steps, everything changes. Like, nobody would say to a baby that's learning to walk, like, oh, you suck, you took one step, you're never going to walk, this doesn't work. What do we say? They take one step and they fall, and we're like, that was amazing. Wow, you can do this. I know you're going to do it. What does that do? It helps them to walk faster. So that's how I orient to regulating. We have to do it from that way. And when we do it from that way, it really, really changes everything. And then lastly, the resistance is the result of our nervous system saying, I don't actually think you're safe in the present moment. If I thought you were safe, I would let you be regulated. I don't think you're safe. I don't want you to suffer. I love you, but I don't think you're safe. And so the resistance is our nervous system saying, I don't know about that. I don't know if it's safe. So resistance is a normal part of the process. It's our nervous system loving us in the form of saying, I don't know if I trust this yet. And what we want to do, and that's why having support is so important. Having accountability, being in groups is really helpful, because it helps us to gently move past some of that resistance in a way that's tolerable.
And is that why people resist change in a way? Is that because we don't feel safe?
Of course, yes. That's why I resist change. That's why I resist stepping into the bigger life we want. That's why we resist not using the coping strategies that we use. We want to not stop using them. Why? Because I won't be safe. And the more we can show our nervous system we're safe, the more, by gently stepping towards the resistance in a tolerable way, the more everything really changes.
So we've been successfully accomplishing some of those things, and we feel the baby steps are adding up and changes happening, and we're more regulated. And like you said, that changes our attraction in relationships. Now, the things and the people we were attracted to, like maybe a narcissistic partner, because I was so codependent, that now I can recognize and realize that doesn't really fulfill me, and I don't want that. But then I don't yet know what the other option is. Like, how do I navigate that once I've changed, or I am in the process of becoming? Like, how do I navigate, like, I'm having some of that now, like, well, I joke that I heal too much and I hate everyone, But,
Yeah.
it's just like, well, everything is different for me, and I just don't
Yes.
know what the other option is.
Yeah. Well, as we heal, what the world around us has to change, and that includes the people.
Mm.
Now, there might be some people that heal alongside of you, which is wonderful, but there will be people that don't. And people can only see the parts of us they see in themselves. And so it does mean that transitioning of things occurs. Um, and what I invite in is like following the somatic experience in our bodies of pleasure in the smallest of ways. What does that look like for me? What do I enjoy? What might I enjoy that I never let myself have space to enjoy? What might I want to engage in that I never have let myself engage in, including rest and pleasure in different ways and different kinds of connection? And we don't know till we try. And so that's really the thing that I really invite for folks. The more we do that and we notice in the world, oh, it's really nice that I allowed that person to come towards me who was really kind, and I let them help me do that thing. Well, that felt good. We don't know until we practice. So that's what I invite in, because it's a really, in the unlearning we find ourselves, and then in the healing we find ourselves, and then it's a discovering this relationship with self in a whole brand new way, that can be really exciting.
And a lot of it too is like being able to spend time with yourself and enjoying your time once you have this like newfound self. How to improve your relationships or your own healing? What can our listeners take home?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing, one to succinctly to name for folks what we want to really be focusing on is, certainly with relationships, is we can never find the external life we want without changing the internal life within. So when we change what's happening internally, it automatically changes everything external. You don't have to worry so much about that, like the partner I want, the things I want, because when you change the internal orientation itself, everything in life begins to reflect that. So what I invite folks to start thinking about is, I know we've talked about a lot today, is beginning to get to know your nervous system is so incredibly important, because it's the foundation of everything. It's how we relate to others, it's our thoughts, behaviors, everything. And then what can I start doing every day to bring myself just a little bit closer to presence? If there's like one starting off point that I would invite folks to do, it's that. Maybe I could do that 10 times a day. Can I start doing that? And then can I start asking myself, in this moment, what do I feel? And if you say, I don't know, I want you to say, well, do I notice any sensation in my body? Anything at all? Can I just be present to that? And if the sensation could talk, like maybe you notice stress in your shoulder, what would the sensation say? And just let whatever arises first arise. And this is going to begin doing for you is getting you back in your body. And our body is where trauma is held, and our body is where trauma is freed. So those simple things, along with everything else we talked about today, are I would say, the most important.
So listen to yourself, be in your own body, and improve your own relationship to self, and that's the way to change your external life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like we have our work cut out for us.
That'll do. It's a never ending journey for sure.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for coming back today and having this really meaty and delicious conversation about how to use somatic work to really improve your life and relationships and heal.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It was really great to be here.